such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the killer nurse who solved 8 strange deaths by confessing. What happens when murders are disguised as natural causes? Well, a killer gets away with murder for 9 years. Yet it would be the killer herself that would reveal her victims list and the strange motives that started it all. By the way, if you don't know, it is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leave a nice comment down below. I also want to remind you I do have a second channel called Genuine Gems, which will be linked down below if you want more content from me that's not true crime. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2007 in Canada, and James Lansing Silcox was an 84-year-old man living in Ontario. This was actually at a long-term care facility in Woodstock, and it was called Caressant Care. James was often going by Lance or JL, but James did not want to live here at all. He was known to be a very strong, independent man who was a World War II veteran with the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps. He had been married to his wife Agnes for the last 64 years, and together they actually had 6 children, 13 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. But at this point they were all very worried about him because he was having trouble taking care of himself, but he refused to admit it. His wife wasn't doing much better, which is why it made it so hard for them to live alone, but his daughter even remembered a time when she tried to get them to use matching walkers, and he completely refused to use it. Eventually, this man, who is said to be kind, gentle, a helpmate, a problem solver, a fixer, a builder, a prankster, and an animal lover, as well as a man who would go to church every Sunday, suffered from a stroke. And at this time, he was also suffering from dementia. And even though the care place was the last place that James wanted to go, his family knew that that was the best option for him, and they had to make the heart-wrenching decision to pack up his things and introduce him to this new place. Caressant Care was very well loved and well spoken of. It was the best place to send your loved ones who needed help in the area, a place you could trust with a life that meant the absolute world to you. They had great ratings and an environment that they had perfected over the last 32 years with 100 patients at a time, or so the families thought. You see, shortly after James had settled into his new home, he was deceased, and on August 11th, James was found unconscious in his bed. As an 84-year-old man, no one believed that foul play had anything to do with this. His family was contacted, and they were told it was most likely a heart attack. His family didn't believe what they were hearing, that this strong man had just all of a sudden unexpectedly died, but they had no reason to believe that Caressant Care was lying to them. But did Caressant Care know that something more sinister had occurred? But then only 4 months later, on December 23rd, an 84-year-old man named Maurice Granat, who went by Mo, was also found deceased in this care home. Mo had 2 daughters, 1 son, 5 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren by this point. His family was told that he died peacefully in his sleep, and his family asked for donations to go to a faith-based charity called Operation Sharing that helped impoverished residents. Then, these kind of weird deaths did stop. Now, it was hard to differentiate these kind of strange deaths where the family didn't really believe it with the deaths that were occurring at the care center, because of course there were other deaths that just did happen with these elderly residents. But if anyone was suspicious about this care home, they now had nothing to go on, and it would be another 4 years before another resident was found deceased in a way like this. Gladys Gina Millard was an 87-year-old who was a widow. She had 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. She was known to go to church, and she was involved in the Ladies' Auxiliary as well as charities and service clubs, but on October 14th of 2011, her family was right next to her as she passed. Donations were asked to be sent to the Alzheimer's Society. Then, with the closest time period yet, another patient was gone. And this was 2 weeks later when 95-year-old Helen Matheson was found. Now, Helen had a husband named Carl, and together they had 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. She was a former school teacher, and she was known to be a good and decent person, and she was really private and trusting. In fact, she trusted everyone. However, she was believed to be suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and friends who would visit her said that she would ask them who they even were. But on October 27th, Helen celebrated her 95th birthday, and only hours later, she was gone. Just a little over a week after that, a 96-year-old named Mary Zorowinski became the next victim, yet still no one had caught the serial killer among them. You see, Mary's granddaughter, Deborah, said that she believed her grandmother would have made it to 100 due to how fun and feisty she was. Mary was known to be a lady of dignity, and she was so incredibly strong. She was a fighter. But on November 7th, she was gone, dying peacefully in her sleep as well. The killer had unfortunately found the perfect victims, ones who were loved and missed dearly, but whose families had no way to prove that this was anything but a natural death, or even a strange death at the most. Especially since none of these victims were giving an autopsy before burial, and most were cremated. The staff at this Caressant Care home filled out paperwork with every victim after looking them over once they died, and they would all say that everything looked normal. But were they telling the truth? It was 2 years later before the other strange death would occur, and this was a 90-year-old Helen Young who was added to the killer's list. Now, Helen had served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and then met and married her husband, Peter. Helen was said to be a woman who did not hesitate to speak her mind on any and all subjects, and she and Peter had many pets that they spoiled, and they also loved to travel together. But she had become a widow before becoming a resident at Caressant Care, and on July 14th of 2013, she was found deceased. The next year, Maureen O'Neill was admitted into the Caressant Care facility after her husband had passed away and her health began to decline. Now, she was only 79 years old, but she was found dead on March 28th of 2014. Then the murders stopped. But really, to the care facility, nothing had changed, and there were still other patients that were dying. Investigators were never contacted, families were not pressing charges, and the care home was never under investigation. To everyone in the community, these were simply individuals who passed away naturally due to old age or complications because they were on the decline, right? Well, not necessarily. In fact, many of them could have lived many more years and had more time with their families, celebrating more birthdays, but instead this was all taken from them because someone else was playing God. But if no one knew what was really going on, then how do we know about these victims today and that they actually were victims of a killer? Well, that's not because investigators magically uncovered foul play, but because 2 years after the last murder, there was a confession. On September 16th of 2016, Toronto police were notified that a woman in a psychiatric hospital was talking about killing her patients. This woman had been a nurse, and she had gone into this inpatient drug rehabilitation program at a center for addiction and mental health. That's when she began to talk about what she had done. Elizabeth Wettlaufer then emailed the College of Nurses to resign as a registered nurse, and this was due to deliberately harming patients in her care and being investigated by police for the same. Elizabeth was then taken from the psychiatric care unit to the police department on October 5th, but she was not being arrested. She just wanted to go in and talk. The full 2-hour confession was recorded, and it is on YouTube. I will link it down below for you to watch if you would like to, but I will be doing a summary here. So I will give you the main points of what Elizabeth said and kind of go into detail about her behavior and what I saw with it. From the beginning, she was kind of joking with the detective and was kind of concerned that the questioning was going to take too long, and she was almost talked to by the detective like she was a child. Like the detective needed to make sure she understood and would ask her to say what he had just said back to him in a way she understood. Now, we don't know a lot about Elizabeth's background just yet, or not at all. And so I'm not sure if she had any mental disabilities or anything like that, but it did appear as though it took her a little while to catch up to what was going on. Elizabeth's main focus at this time was to ask about her mom and dad, who had just been told that she was confessing to murders, and that she wanted to go and see them to check on them to make sure that they were okay. Elizabeth then began talking about her work history that she was asked about. This almost appears as though she was just telling her life story. She would go on different tangents. It was not just a linear timeline of her work events. But she said that she had graduated from the London Baptist Bible College with a degree in religious education counseling. She soon realized that this wasn't for her and it wasn't paying well, so she went to the Conestoga College for nursing. She began working in a group home for a while, but then she got a job at Caressant Care in June of 2007 because it paid her better. But 2 months later, the first victim, James Silcox, was found deceased. Now, Elizabeth said that she would work the night shift. She would be the one in charge of all of the evening medication of all of the residents. And when investigators spoke to Elizabeth's coworkers, they said that at first she was very energetic, she was caring and professional, but it soon was like a downward spiral. When she was asked if the job was tough, she said, "I knew they were going to die, and it just gave an opportunity to give the family a rest." However, the more she worked there, the more her coworkers began to worry about her. She would often come late and drunk, and one time she was even found in the basement, passed out during her shift. But throughout her time there, she had been suspected of medication-related errors where she was actually suspended from her job for a while. But she was then told to take a leave of absence. It was requested that she do this, but she denied this, and then instead she was fired. This was in March of 2014, the same year that the murders stopped. But she was actually fired because she gave the wrong medication to a patient. And Elizabeth also confessed to taking medication from the patients for herself because the patients couldn't tell if she gave them the pills or if she gave them the wrong ones, and so she was able to take them. When she was fired from Caressant Care, the College of Nurses, which basically overlooked the behavior of nurses and everything happening with them, they were informed, and due to confidentiality, this report was never released to the public, so different care homes had no idea when they began hiring her. So without knowing, the Meadow Park Care Center hired a killer. This job didn't last long though because Elizabeth was still struggling with substance and alcohol abuse, and she finally decided to check herself into a drug rehab facility in 2015. There she said that her job was actually causing her addiction because she felt like she had to be this best possible person and had to give medication to 32 people, which was stressful for her. However, before she had left the Meadow Life Care Center, she had taken another life, one we haven't talked about. This is 75-year-old Arpad Horvath, and he had a wife named Lana, 2 children, and 3 grandchildren. He had gone to this care facility due to dementia and diabetes. Arpad was actually the owner and chief engineer of Central Tool and Die and was the president of the Hungarian Club of London. And his son remembered him as someone who would say, "Let's get things done. Let's not wait till next year. Let's do it now." But when he passed on August 31st of 2014 in the hospital, his son had whispered in his ear that it was okay for him to let go, and he did. Elizabeth confessed that every patient that she picked to kill, so every victim, was someone who suffered with dementia. That was part of her criteria. She said she was very picky about her victims, and they were basically only picked if they were also mean and difficult to look after. She would then inject her victims with large amounts of insulin, something that would ensure that they would die and also wouldn't be shown in an autopsy or right after death. She said that they would go peacefully and that they would shake, go red, lose consciousness, and have seizures. But she was also sorry. She said that she just wanted to put them into a coma so it would make them easier to work with. But she also said she talked about killing her psychiatrist and her co-workers as well. It turned out, though, that her trigger may have been something to do with her personal life. You see, Elizabeth had lived in Woodstock her entire life, and she had gotten married in 1997. However, in 2007, when the murders began, her and her husband had officially decided to separate. This was Elizabeth's idea, though, because she had recently come out as a lesbian. She also said he never wanted children, and she did. Elizabeth also said that around this time she was taking medication for borderline personality disorder, and this, she said, caused her to hear a voice that said, "I'll be with you, don't worry about it." And after this, she heard the voices again. She would hear these voices right before she committed murder, and then once she did, she would hear laughter. This laughter, this voice would come from her chest/stomach area, and then her chest would emit a cackling from the pit of hell. She believed God was going to use her for something, and that something happened to be murder. She said that with her first victim, James, he wasn't always her patient, but coworkers would say that he grabbed their chests and he would talk bad about his wife, and she then decided to inject him with insulin that was available to all nurses without anybody knowing that she was actually taking it. It was not being documented, and so when he began acting strange, she called in his family to say goodbye. The family then praised her for her work and helping James through this hard time, and she said she felt awful. Now, she said that his behavior was not the reason for the kill, but she did feel relief after he was gone because she believed that he was one that God wanted back. Then with Maurice Grenet, Elizabeth said that he also grabbed Nurse's breasts and that he grabbed her, and that same day she injected him with insulin. This was in the leg, and it turned out so many of these victims actually passed after Elizabeth was off of her shift, which made it even harder to point to her having any involvement. She would inject them and then go home for somebody else to deal with their deaths. Now, she said that she believed Helen Matheson was ready to die, and that they talked about having blueberry pie and ice cream, so she brought that to her and then injected her to death. With Mary, she said that she was a very feisty woman and told Elizabeth she was going to die that night. Mary did. And so she asked to be put on her deathbed, and Elizabeth believed this was a sign and injected her as well. With Gladys, Elizabeth said that she had quite a spirit, and she punched a man for being mean to another woman, but she was going downhill fast, and she said that she got this surging feeling, which is what happened right before she believed she needed to murder someone, and that it was going to be Gladys who was next. She then injected her and went home. But Elizabeth said she always feared coming back to work that next day after a murder and being caught, but she never was. With Helen, she said she was always miserable and always saying that she wanted to die, and Elizabeth said that something snapped inside of her one night, and she said that she would die. Then when all of the nurses were checking on their bodies, or when they were, struggling between the time of being injected and dying, Elizabeth would pretend to take their blood sugar, which would have been spiked due to the insulin, and nobody would notice that she really didn't, and she just wrote down a normal number. Then with Maureen, Elizabeth said that she would attack other patients and nurses and was actually given multiple nurses at a time to watch her, but one night it was just Elizabeth and her, and she said she wanted to put her into a coma. She injected her. Maureen was taken to the hospital for a stroke, and then she got back to the care facility, and then she passed away. Elizabeth then said that our pad was just really mean, and she injected him one night because she wanted to, and he had a stroke. He survived a few more days. It turned out these 8 victims were not her only ones. Many had survived her attempts to kill them, including 2 residents at Caressant Care who were 63-year-old Michael Priddle and 57-year-old Wayne Hedges. Then one of her last jobs, which was at a retirement home in Paris, Ontario, 77-year-old Sandra Towler was living there there when Elizabeth began to work as a nurse. Elizabeth said that she injected Sandra twice with large amounts of insulin, but she had survived. This also happened at a private residence where she would go and take care of a 60-year-old named Beverly Bertrand. She was injected as well, but she kept calling the nurse that was taking over her shift asking if Beverly was okay, and she always was. But her first survivors were ones that were actually injected around the time of the first victim, who was James Silcox. These were two sisters at Caressant Care named Clotilde Adriano and Albino Demetrios, who were 87 and 88-year-old sisters. They would die shortly after being injected, but it was said that insulin was not the actual cause because it was too long after Elizabeth actually injected them. But Elizabeth said that she actually resigned from her last job she had gotten at that retirement home in Paris, Ontario, because she was doing much better mentally. And she had her 30-day evaluation. They were saying she did good, but because of the lack of people at the schools, they needed her to go and work with the insulin, with the children. She said she then panicked and quit because she would have been working with kids and she was feared that she wouldn't be able to stop herself from killing them. She then ran away, she came back home, and she pretended to go to work for the next 2 weeks, but she didn't have a job. She then decided she didn't want to hurt anyone anymore, and she also did not want to be a nurse. She believed it could be God or the devil inside of her wanting her to kill, and that when she was visited by these surges, she could not control them. Yet she also said she knew the difference between right and wrong, and she was starting to doubt that it really was God. That's when she took a gap from killing, and it would be, years between these kills, and she actually started reading the Bible more. She then began telling her friends what she had done, who said if she didn't get help, they would call the police the next day. And that's when she checked herself into a psychiatric ward and confessed to what she had done.
And you said you resigned from there?
Yes.
Okay. What brought you to that?
That's where things get a little crazy.
Okay.
This is part that I haven't told the doctors. Because it seems so stupid now. When my ex and I broke up in 2007, I was already taking the medication for my borderline personality disorder. And I was so angry. And it was like a voice said inside me, I'll use you, don't worry about it. And the different times that I have caused people's deaths or caused them discomfort through the insulin, I believe it was the influence of that voice or whatever it was. It wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in my ear. And when I would do it, afterwards I would hear like a laughter in my chest. I did a lot of looking into how I could get help, because I realized I needed help with whatever this was. Because part of me had started to believe that it was the devil, and part of me thought it might be God as a purpose through my life. And I know the doctor asked me those questions, and I didn't answer them because I was so ashamed. But I didn't want this to keep going on, so I quit both jobs. I had the odd urge to do it, but I resisted by going to church, reading my Bible, praying.
She said she didn't know if she wanted to give out names of the victims that she actually killed and didn't kill naturally, because there were many who died over the time when she was working at these places. But she said that the families believed they were peaceful deaths and that she didn't want to disturb that, but her friend had told her that investigators would have to go through every single death and disturb so many more families that had nothing to do with this case if she didn't, so she ended up telling the names. But it turned out that Elizabeth had tried to tell many people what she had done prior to being in this psychiatric ward. This was including a lawyer who told her to keep this a secret, take it to her grave, and not go to the police. She also told a pastor on Halloween 2013 about the killings, and he just prayed over her, told her that it was God's grace that he would not go to the police as long as she didn't do it again. And then he let her go. Elizabeth had never had a criminal record prior to this. She had grown up as a child who was often made fun of and kind of was the outcast in school, but she had also been fired from her first ever nursing job at Geraldine General Hospital in 1996 for stealing Ativan and overdosing. She was now being charged with 8 murders, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Elizabeth said that she told one of her girlfriends about the first 2 murders, and her girlfriend at the time said she needed to stop, but Elizabeth didn't know if she actually even believed her. It was also found that Elizabeth confessed to a teenager who was working at the care center, as well as an ex-boyfriend who told her that she needed to change her job and he would look after her. She also told one of her Narcotics Anonymous sponsors, who just laughed in her face. When the news broke of this case, one of the survivors, Beverly Bertram, came forward saying that she had a lot of emotions and she was trying to stay positive and upbeat, but she said that she has nightmares and she still doesn't like people coming to her house. She has no friends to this day except for her care workers because she doesn't trust people at all. She said that Elizabeth being in custody will give people a peace of mind that nobody has to be afraid anymore.
Bertram lived at home relying on Wettlaufer for occasional home care until one of those visits left her slipping into a near-fatal insulin overdose.
I no longer know who I am because Elizabeth Wettlaufer consumes my life. I don't understand why she was bound, bent, and determined to kill me. I get, oh, she's in jail, don't worry about it, it's over. It's not over. We as the victims are not weak. We need care. And that doesn't mean we don't matter anymore.
The 70-year-old stunned the silent courtroom, pitying the very woman who tried to kill her.
Elizabeth Wettlaufer didn't get respect. I'm not condoning anything she did. But if respect had been given to her as a person, what happened wouldn't have happened. She cried for help many times, and none was given.
Elizabeth pled guilty and confessed to all of the charges, meaning that she didn't have to have a trial. The judge sentenced her to 8 concurrent life sentences and the possibility of parole in 25 years. She was sent to the Grand Valley Institution for Women, but the next year she was actually transferred to a secure facility to receive medical treatment. But this was a place that had internet, music, sports. The victims' families were outraged because they weren't told where she was going, and this was after they begged to be told. But if murder wasn't horrifying enough, it was found that Elizabeth actually had a website where she would post writings. Some of them were just normal writing, poetry, but some of them were disturbing, including one that said she watches some life drain from the notch in his neck vein. As it soothingly pulls, it smothers her pain. Sweet stiletto so sharp craves another cut. Obeying a call, she moves to his gut. Blade traces a line from navel to spine, grating on rib bones, slicing intestine. And another saying, "Where am I left then? What would they say? Yes, what will they say when the real truth is known? When it is found, what I do alone." It turned out that there was a 15th victim that Elizabeth never talked about until the very end. This was 77-year-old Florence Beadall, who was at the Meadow Park Care Facility, and this was the second full home that Elizabeth had worked at, but Elizabeth had actually injected her while her daughter stepped out to get lunch, and she was left alone. But Florence was actually cremated, so this couldn't be proven, and so it was not something that Elizabeth could be charged with, and it was not something that was told to the public, unlike the other victims, until recently. Now, a 2-year inquiry was actually launched in 2017 to find out what happened and how to prevent it in the future. Now, Eileen Gladys was the commissioner who found that Elizabeth had mentioned the lack of supervision of the insulin. It was found that it was not counted and it was very available. But Elizabeth said that if it had been counted, she would have had a lot less access to it and would not have been able to kill without being caught. Because, of course, if it was documented, it would have gotten back to her. The pharmacies also never questioned why so much was being used. They would just refill and go on with their lives, unlike other drugs. The room it was kept in was also completely covered in walls, and Elizabeth said that meant that she could just go in and nobody would see her. So she mentioned something about having glass walls in the room. There were also supposed to be cameras installed at the Caressant Care facility, but there never actually were. Doctors never ordered autopsies just to make sure. They never requested any sort of medical examination, and they just kind of did a quick look over and then sent them to their families to be buried. Those in charge of certifying nurses were also found to be just letting people slide through. In fact, when Elizabeth went to another facility, she was asked to change a PICC line and to use proper sterilization techniques, and she couldn't do either, yet she was still able to be certified. No check-ins were ever performed on the mental health of the staff either. Now, Elizabeth had a history of mental illness and substance abuse. She had been seeing a psychiatrist every month throughout the murders. She was on an antipsychotic as well as medication for OCD and depression. She claimed that she would go to the psychiatrist. He would simply ask, "Is everything going okay?" She would say yes, and then he would hand her medication. In fact, when she was taken off of all of this medication while in prison, Elizabeth told her lawyers that her head was much more clear and she could feel more remorse at that point. None of this was noted on the College of Nurses page for future employers to look at either. None of this about Elizabeth's history, about her being fired, about her mental illnesses. By that point, nurses had started using dial-ups for insulin to make sure that they were counted, but they said that it's time-consuming and nobody likes to do it. There was also a problem with the whole care system of nobody having enough staff and nurses working overtime. It was found that Elizabeth Wettlaufer would never have been caught if she didn't confess. The commissioner also wanted to make sure everybody knew that these were not mercy killings because they were old and she wanted to take away their pain. They were for her own gratification and for no other reason. The inquiry contained 91 recommendations of changes to the healthcare system because it is strained and not broken, is what they found. It was also dedicated to the victims and their families, and counseling services are actually going to be given to all of them for free, including the survivors, for the next 2 years. The inquiry was sent to every care facility in the area, hoping to change things. Eileen said that there is no simple fix to avoiding these tragedies, that it will take continuous work, and this is the beginning of changing the way care homes are monitored and nurses are held accountable. However, I hope this isn't just talk and is actually something that is going to be put into action. The College of Nurses of Ontario also charged Elizabeth with professional misconduct to officially bar her from the profession. She was found guilty and her nursing registration was revoked indefinitely. I think Elizabeth needed much more mental health help than she was given. I believe many people failed her when she confessed to them and they did nothing. But does that take away her guilt of the murders? Was she criminally insane? While she did believe that God or the devil was making her do this, she knew that it was wrong. So what do you think caused her to begin killing? Why did she murder 8 people and tried to kill many more? Was it truly because the residents were rude, she was overworked? But that's not an excuse, but was it because of that? Or was this something where she really was hearing voices and they were telling her what to do? It's horrifying to think that these murders not only went unsolved, but they were completely unknown. And that's due to the power of this nurse and many other in the medical field, when there is a failure to monitor and keep everyone safe. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts on this. I know at some points it sounds like Elizabeth was this sweet, innocent, she feels remorseful, she didn't know what she was doing, she was hearing voices. But then in other ways, it's like, but you knew what you were doing and you knew it was wrong and you continued to do it. So that's where I find it really hard. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.